Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, MR.Creepy. So today's video is definitely going to creep you out. In this video, we're getting into real encounters people had in small California towns. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Alright, let's get into tonight's stories. This was about 2 years ago, late October. I had taken a week off work, nothing special, just vacation days I hadn't used. I didn't have plans, I just wanted to drive. I grew up in Bakersfield, and I'd spent most of my life either in the valley or in the city, so I figured I'd take the long way up toward the coast. Not the fast route, the slow one, the back roads through the inland hills that people don't really use anymore. I left on a Tuesday morning. Sky was clear, about 62 degrees. My car was fine. A 2019 Civic with fresh tires. I had a full tank, a paper atlas I'd bought at a truck stop the week before, and my phone. I wasn't in any rush. That was the whole point. The first 2 days were fine. Great, actually. Quiet roads. I stopped at a few overlooks and ate bad sandwiches in the car and listened to a podcast. Normal stuff. The third day is where I need to start paying attention, because the third day is when things went wrong. And they went wrong so gradually that I didn't notice until it was too late to do anything about it. I was somewhere on a 2-lane road that fed off Highway 33, heading roughly northwest. The atlas showed it as a county connector, the kind of road that exists to link ranches to the main highway without adding much else. No towns marked, no services, just line on the page. I'd been on it for maybe 50 minutes when the GPS froze. Not a signal thing. The app just stopped. The blue dot sat in the middle of a blank area and didn't move. I zoomed out. Still nothing. No road label. No county outline. Just a blue dot floating in empty space. I switched apps. Same thing. I checked my signal. 2 bars. I told myself it was a dead zone. Happens all the time out there. I kept driving. The road was in good shape. That was the strange part. No potholes. No crumbling edges. For a county connector that didn't show up on GPS, it was in better condition than most state roads I'd been on. That should have been the first thing I questioned. I didn't. What I did notice was the quiet, not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. I hadn't passed another car in over an hour. No farm trucks, no delivery vehicles, nothing. And there were no birds either. Not that I could hear, just the sound of my tires on the road, and the hum of the engine, and nothing else. The hills looked the same on both sides. Dry grass, yellow-brown, rolling. The light was getting low, maybe 4:30. The sky had gone from clear blue to a flat, pale color. Not quite gray, not quite white, like the color was draining out of it slowly. Then I saw the gas station. It was set back from the road, maybe 30 feet. Old pumps, no brand logo. The awning was still up, but the paint on it was completely gone, just bare faded material, sagging in the middle. The bay doors on the side were shut, windows black. A sign that might have had a name on it once was just a blank white board. I slowed down. I thought about stopping. I didn't need gas. I still had 3/4 of a tank. I kept going. About 4 miles after that I saw the sign, green, standard highway marker, white reflective letters. It said, Los Condonados, 3 mi. I slowed down and looked at it again. I knew Central California pretty well. Not perfectly, but well. I'd read through that atlas 3 times before the trip. I'd spent 2 evenings on travel forums reading about backroad routes in Kern and San Luis Obispo counties. I had never seen that name. I pulled over and looked it up on my phone. Nothing. Not a single result. I checked the atlas. Nothing in the index. I checked Google Maps directly. I typed the name exactly as it appeared on the sign. The search returned no results. 3 miles ahead on a public highway, and it didn't exist anywhere. I sat there for probably 2 minutes. Then I thought, it's probably just a small ranching community. Private property, private roads. Nobody bothered to put it on a map. California has dozens of places like that. I kept driving. The road started narrowing, not dramatically, just by a few feet on each side. Like the shoulder was pulling in. The turns got tighter. The hills got steeper. I had to drop my speed down to about 25 to take some of the bends without drifting. Then I crossed into the town. There was no second sign, no population marker, just the road getting slightly wider again, and then buildings appearing on both sides. The first thing I noticed was the light, or the lack of it. The sun was still up, just barely, but the town felt darker than the road had been. Like the buildings were pulling the light in and not giving it back. Every house was one story, flat roof, same sandy stucco, same barred windows. The yards were dead grass and gravel with plastic lawn chairs sitting in them. The cheap kind, some of them tipped on their sides. No cars on the road, no lights in the windows. I drove slowly, my foot barely on the gas. I looked left and right at every house. Curtains drawn, doors closed. One screen door was hanging open and it moved a little in the air, but I couldn't feel any breeze inside my car. The town was maybe 6 blocks long. At the end of it, the road curved and put me in a small circle. Not a proper roundabout, just a circle of road around a patch of dead grass with a rusted bench in the middle. Around the circle there was a post office, door shut, and the sign above it barely readable. A diner with the blinds down. A laundromat with plywood across the front window. I was going to drive straight through the circle and out the other side. That's when my car died. Not a slow thing. It just cut off. Engine, radio, dash lights, everything. I rolled to a stop in the middle of the circle and sat there. I sat there for a second. Before I did anything, my hands were still on the wheel. The car was completely silent. I could hear my own breathing. I popped the hood and got out. It was warm outside, dry. The air had that closed-up paper smell, the kind you get in a room that hasn't been opened in a long time. I looked at the engine. Nothing obvious. No smoke, no burning smell. Belts looked fine. I checked the oil on the dipstick. Fine. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes looking at an engine that had no visible reason to be dead. I got back in and turned the key. It started. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Then I looked at the clock on the dash. It read 12:04, blinking, like the battery had been fully reset. My phone said it was 4:51 p.m. I looked around the circle. When I'd come in, there had been one road leading out the way I came. I could see the curve I'd come around and the narrow road disappearing back into the hills. But now there was a second road. It came off the circle on the opposite side, same width as the first one, same pavement, but next to it, nailed to a wooden post, was a handmade sign. The wood was rough cut. The letters were painted on in black. It said, 12 Way. I stared at that sign. I had been in the circle less than 5 minutes. There had not been a second road when I pulled in. I decided to leave the way I came. I pulled out of the circle and took the road I recognized. The curve I'd come around, the narrowing road back into the hills. 8 minutes later, I was back in the circle. I sat there and tried to think. I hadn't turned. I hadn't looped. The road had gone straight and then curved once to the left, and then I was here again. I looked at the post office, the diner, the plywood laundromat, same position, same everything. I tried again, same result. I came back to the circle. Third time I pushed the speed up, 40 on a road that should have been 25 at most. I watched every turn. I watched the road constantly. I didn't look away once. I was back in the circle. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and just breathed for a moment. My gas gauge dropped while I was sitting still, a quarter of the tank. It only went to my meal. That's when I took the throughway. The road was identical to the other one, same pavement, same hills on both sides. But about 2 minutes in the town appeared again, and this time it was different. There were people. A man was standing on the corner just past the diner. He was holding something dark against his side, a bag or a bundle of some kind. He was facing my direction, completely still, not watching me, not watching anything, just standing there the way a person stands when they've been standing in one place for a very long time. I drove past him slowly. He didn't move, didn't follow me with his eyes, didn't react at all. About half a block further, there was a kid sitting on the curb outside one of the houses, head down, arms resting on his knees, same stillness, like he'd been placed there. I honked. Nothing. I humped again, longer this time. Neither of them moved. My hands were shaking. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and my mouth was dry and I was breathing too fast. I made myself slow, my breathing down, in through the nose, out slow. I kept driving. I pulled over in front of a building that had the faded outline of letters above the door. I could make out 2 words. The first was gone. The second was academy, a school maybe. I grabbed a receipt from my center console and wrote down the town name. I didn't have a pen, so I used a pencil stub I kept in the cuff holder. Los Condenados. I looked at it. Then I looked again. The letters were wrong, not smeared, not smudged. Wrong, like they'd been rearranged while I was looking away. What I'd written now read something that wasn't a word in any language I recognized. I put the receipt down. I tried every road in the town, every alley between the houses, every path that seemed to lead outward. Each time I ended up back at the circle. Sometimes the buildings were in different positions. The diner moved. The post office switched sides. Once I drove a full block and looked in my rearview mirror, and the school was behind me, exactly where I'd parked, like I had never moved. I got out and walked. I picked the direction and walked in a straight line, counting my steps. I passed 4 buildings. Then I turned a corner. My car was parked 20 feet ahead of me. I hadn't circled back. I had walked straight. My legs felt weak. I stood on that empty street in a town that didn't exist and looked at my car and felt something I can't fully describe. Not panic. Something quieter than panic. Something more like the moment right before you understand something that you can't ununderstand. There was a mirror nailed to a utility pole near the corner. Just a basic rectangular mirror, the kind you find in a bathroom. It was angled outward at about 45 degrees. I don't know why, but I stopped and looked at it. It should have reflected the street behind me. It reflected my car at an intersection I had never seen. Not behind me, not anywhere near where I was standing. A T-junction with a stop sign. My car parked against the curb with the driver door slightly open, but my driver door wasn't open. I looked at my car. Door closed. I looked at the mirror. Door open. I walked away from the mirror and didn't look at it again. I drove through a dirt lot on the edge of town. No road. Just open ground between 2 buildings. My suspension hit hard on the broken earth, and the car rocked, and I kept the gas down, and then I hit pavement. Hills, real hills, yellow grass, power lines, a fence post with a reflector on it. I almost started crying. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I floored it. I didn't check the speed. I didn't check where I was going. I drove for about 15 minutes just trying to get distance between me and whatever that had been. Then I came around a bend. Green sign on the right side of the road. Los Condenados won me. I hit the brakes hard. The car skidded a little on loose gravel at the shoulder. I sat there staring at that sign, and I screamed. I'm not sure how long. Long enough that my throat hurt after. Then I don't remember anything. I woke up at a rest stop. Sun was fully up. My phone said 7:14 a.m. I had been unconscious for roughly 14 hours. My gas tank was full. My backpack was on the passenger seat, zipped up neatly. I never put it there. It had been in the back seat when I left. Every receipt and scrap of paper I'd written on during the trip was gone. My phone was missing. I found it 6 days later wedged under the driver's seat. Battery completely dead. When I charged it and turned it on, the last 12 hours of location history were blank. Not deleted, just blank, like the phone had stopped existing during that time. I've asked about Los Condenados, rangers, truckers, a retired county surveyor I found through a hiking forum. No one recognizes the name. One old man at the hardware store outside Taft told me to be careful about the roads west of the reservoir, said there were places out there that don't welcome attention. He didn't elaborate. He turned back to what he was doing. I don't drive alone on back roads anymore, and if I see a highway sign for a town I don't recognize, I don't slow down. I don't look at the sign a second time. I just keep going, and I don't think about it until I'm somewhere with other people and all the lights are on. I don't tell this story often, not because I think people won't believe me, but because every time I get to a certain part, I have to stop and remind myself that I was right there, a few aisles over, and I had no idea. This was about 3 years ago. I was 24. I'd just moved to a small town called Millvale, about 40 minutes east of Fresno in the foothills. Small place, maybe 2,000 people. one gas station, one pharmacy, one grocery store. The grocery store was called Valley Fresh Market. It was a regional chain. Nothing fancy, maybe 8 aisles, a small deli counter in the back, and a loading dock that smelled like cardboard and cold air, no matter what season it was. I got hired for overnight stocking, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The pay was decent for the area, and I needed something with no customer interaction because I was going through a rough period, and I just wanted to work with my hands and not talk to anyone. Most nights there were 3 of us. Me, a guy named Pete who was about 40 and had worked there for years, and our shift manager, a man named Roy. Roy was maybe 55, quiet, efficient. He knew the store the way you know your own house in the dark. He didn't need to turn lights on in the back warehouse to find anything. He just walked in and went directly to whatever he needed. I liked Roy. He wasn't warm, but he was fair. He left you alone if you were doing your job, and he only came to find you if something needed fixing. The night it happened was a Wednesday in November. Cold outside, the kind of cold that comes down out of the hills and sits in the valley and doesn't move. Pete had called in sick, so it was just me and Roy. Roy told me when I clocked in. He said it like it was nothing. Just the 2 of us tonight. I said okay. I put my bag in the break room, tied my apron, and started pulling pallets from the back. For the first couple hours, everything was normal. I was working the cereal aisle. Roy was somewhere toward the back doing dairy and frozen. The store was quiet, the way it always was at that hour. The fluorescent lights hummed, the coolers buzzed. Sometimes you'd hear a pallet jack rolling somewhere in the building, and you'd know where the other person was. Around midnight, Roy came to the front of my aisle. I heard him before I saw him. His footsteps were fast, not running, but close. I pulled out one earbud and looked up. His face was wrong. Roy never looked rattled. In the months I'd worked with him, I'd seen him deal with a broken refrigerator unit, a shoplifter, and a delivery driver who'd sent us the wrong order twice in a row. He handled all of it the same way, flat and calm. But standing at the end of my aisle, he looked rattled. He asked me if I'd seen anyone come in. I said no. I asked what he meant. He said he saw someone walk past the end of his aisle toward the front of the store. He said it was a man, average height, dark jacket, moving slowly, close to the shelves, not in the middle of the aisle the way a person walks when they're supposed to be there. I asked if he was sure it wasn't a reflection off the cooler glass. He looked at me for a second and then said, maybe, but he didn't sound like he believed it. He went back to work. I stood there for a moment after he left. Roy was not a man who spooked easily. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Whatever he saw, it was enough to make him walk the length of the store to ask me about it. I put my earbud back in, but I turned the volume down. The next 3 hours were quiet. I finished cereal, moved to canned goods, started on the soup section. I didn't see Roy, but I could hear the pallet jack in the back sometimes. Normal sounds. Normal night. Around 3 in the morning, I finished everything Roy had assigned me. I went to find him to ask what to do next. I checked the dairy aisle. Not there. The frozen section. Not there. I walked every aisle from front to back. Nothing. I went into the back warehouse and called his name. The warehouse was cold and dark, and my voice came back to me a little off the metal shelves. No answer. I checked the break room. Empty. His coffee mug was on the table, half full. Still warm when I put my hand near it. Still warm. I went outside to the parking lot. His car was there. A grey Silverado parked near the back corner, where staff always parked. I walked to it and looked in the window. His jacket was on the passenger seat. His phone was on the dashboard, face down. His jacket was inside the car. It was maybe 45 degrees outside. I went back in and walked the whole store again. Slower this time. I looked down every aisle. I looked behind the end caps. I looked in the single store bathroom near the deli. I checked inside the walk-in cooler with the light on. I found his cart. It was in aisle 4, the condiments aisle, parked at an angle near the middle of the row, like he'd just stepped away for a second. Half the boxes on it were stocked. The other half were still stacked on the cart in the order he'd been working through them. A box cutter was sitting on top of the pile, blade retracted. You don't leave your box cutter on the cart. That's the first thing they teach you. You keep it in your apron pocket. Roy had taught me that himself on my first shift. I called the police at 3:47 a.m. 2 officers came. They walked the store. They checked everything I'd already checked, and a few things I hadn't, including the roof access, which was locked from the inside, and a crawl space behind the dairy units that hadn't been opened in years, based on the dust on the latch. Roy wasn't in the building. The store manager came in around 5. He had the code for the CCTV system, and he pulled it up on the office computer with one of the officers. We went back to 10 p.m. and watched it forward. The store was empty when Roy and I arrived. We came in through the back entrance. We went to the break room. We started work. Everything normal for the first hour and 40 minutes. Then the officer leaned forward. There was a man in the store. He come in through the front entrance at 11:43 p.m. The front doors were locked from outside, but could be pushed open from inside because of the fire code. He'd come in through the gap between the automatic doors on the wall, slow, using his body to push through without triggering the sensor mat. He knew where the sensor mat was. He moved through the store like he knew the layout. He stayed near the shelves, always close to the end caps, always just far enough back that he wouldn't be visible from the adjacent aisle. He moved when the ambient noise covered him. When a cooler compressor kicked on, he moved. When the pallet jack was running, he moved. When it was quiet, he was still. We watched him for 23 minutes on fast forward. He covered most of the store. Then we watched him find Roy. Roy was in the back of the dairy aisle, kneeling down to stock the bottom shelf. The man came from the far end of the aisle. He walked up behind Roy and he had something in his hand. The camera angle wasn't good enough to see exactly what, but Roy stood up slowly. He put his hands up slightly, not high, just out from his sides. He turned. They faced each other. Then the man walked Roy toward the back of the store. Roy walked in front, upright, normal pace, like they were just two people walking somewhere together, but his hands stayed slightly out from his sides the whole way. They went through the back warehouse door and out to the loading dock. The loading dock camera was offline. It had been offline for 2 weeks because of a wiring issue the store hadn't fixed yet. The officer watching the footage pushed his chair back and rubbed his face. We all sat there for a second. I thought about Roy's coffee cup on the break room table, still warm when I'd found it. I thought about how far from the dairy aisle the break room was, and how long it would have taken me to walk there after he left his cart, and what was happening in the back of the store during that time. I had been maybe 40 feet away with one earbud in. The police said from what they could tell, based on the footage and the body language, the two men likely knew each other. They said it appeared to be targeted. They said it didn't look random. Roy had never mentioned anyone. In months of working with him, I'd never heard him talk about trouble, a dispute, an ex, a debt, nothing. They never identified the man on the camera. The footage quality wasn't good enough. Dark jacket, average build, kept his face angled away from every camera he passed, like he'd either studied the layout of the cameras before that night or had been in the store enough times to know them. Roy never turned up. I went back to work twice after that. Both times I stood in the cereal aisle at midnight and listened to the store and couldn't do it. On the third night, I called the manager before my shift and told him I was done. I still think about the box cutter on the cart. Blade retracted. Roy was careful about everything. He retracted that blade, even when he was just stepping away for 30 seconds. Even that close to the end, whatever was happening, some part of him was still doing the small, careful things the right way. I don't do overnight shifts anymore. Any job, any building, I don't care what it pays. And I've never worked alone in a building since. Not once. Not even for an hour. Some things you learn too late to unlearn. My brother Milo had been texting me about it for 3 weeks straight, and I kept finding reasons to say no. It was December. It was cold. I had things to do. But eventually I ran out of excuses and said yes, mostly because Milo doesn't ask for much, and when he does, he doesn't stop until you show up. I'm glad I went, and I wish I hadn't. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I've never figured out how to hold them together properly. Milo is a photographer. Not professionally, but seriously. He had been working on a project for months. A photo essay about forgotten mining settlements in the mountains of Central California. Old camps mostly, places that showed up in county land records from the 1800s but weren't on any modern map. He had a list of 3 sites he wanted to document before winter got too deep into the mountains. The 3rd site on his list was called Creswell Hollow. He'd found the name in a land deed at the county courthouse, handwritten in the margin. Just the name and a rough directional note and a set of coordinates. When he typed the coordinates into his GPS, nothing came up. Blank space. No roads, no labels, no terrain markers, just empty. That made him want to go more. We left on a Thursday morning in the first week of December. Milo's truck was packed the night before. Camera bags, a drone case, 2 tents, sleeping bags rated to -10, food for 4 days, a first aid kit, and 3 printed maps that he'd laminated himself. He was always like that, over-prepared in a way that used to embarrass me when we were kids, and that I've come to appreciate as an adult. The drive took about 2.5 hours. The last 40 minutes was on a Forest Service road that had been graded at some point, but not recently. The truck handled it fine until we hit a drift about a mile from where the coordinates pointed. Snow across the road, maybe 2 feet deep, hard packed. We weren't getting through it in the truck. We strapped on our snowshoes and started walking. It was cold. I mean genuinely cold. Not the kind of cold you complain about in the city. The kind that gets into your face and stays there and makes your eyes water, whether you want them to or not. The sky was low and grey, and the trees on both sides of the logging road were heavy with snow and completely still. No wind, no birds, no sound except our feet and our breathing, and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere in the trees from the weight of the snow. We walked for about an hour. Then Milo stopped and pointed down. We were at the top of a small rise, and below us, maybe 200 feet down a gentle slope, was the hollow. It looked like a wound in the landscape. That's the only way I can describe it. The hills closed in around it on 3 sides, and the trees at the edges were dense and dark. And in the middle of all that white snow were the black frames of maybe a dozen buildings. Most of them were collapsed. Half walls, broken roof lines buried under snow, beams sticking up at angles like the ribs of something dead. But one building was still standing, 2 stories, walls intact. The roof had partially caved on the right side, but the left side held. The windows were gone, but the frames were there. It was the biggest structure in the hollow by a significant margin. Milo looked at me and said, "That's where we're sleeping tonight." I looked at it for a moment, then I said okay. We spent the first 2 hours exploring while the light was still good. Milo was in his element, moving from building to building with his camera, wiping snow off surfaces to get at the detail underneath, rusted hinges, peeling paint on a door frame, the ghost of lettering on a wooden sign that had been weathered down to almost nothing. The standing building was better inside than I expected. Cold, obviously. The kind of cold that sits still in an enclosed space and doesn't move. The floorboards were solid on the ground floor. Some of the furniture was still there, frozen into position. A table with 2 chairs, a shelf with nothing left on it, a small iron stove in the corner that we couldn't use because the flue was blocked. Milo was obsessed with the upstairs bathroom. It still had a clawfoot tub coated in a thick layer of frost. He must have taken 40 photos of it from different angles. Just before the sun dropped, I took the drone out. I wanted to get an aerial view of the full hollow while there was still enough light. From above, it looked even more enclosed than it did from the ground. The ridges came in tight on all 3 sides, and the tree line was dense, and the buildings in the middle looked very small and very exposed. I flew the drone higher to get the full outline of the place. That's when I saw them. Footprints, one set, coming out of the trees at the far end of the hollow, moving in a straight line across the open snow, clean and deep and evenly spaced. They crossed the full width of the open ground, and they went directly toward the building we were staying in, and they stopped at the front steps. They just stopped. No turn, no continuation around the side of the building. No second set coming back out. They started at the trees and ended at our front door, I brought the drone back down fast. My hands weren't steady when I caught it. I looked at Milo. He was crouched near the base of a wall, doing something with his lens. He hadn't seen the screen. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was an old trail, someone who'd passed through before the last snowfall. A hunter maybe. But the snow was fresh. It had come down heavy 2 days before we arrived, and there hadn't been anything since. Those prints were made after the last snowfall. I put the drone in its case and went inside. That night we ate freeze-dried food heated on a camp stove, and drank lukewarm instant coffee and didn't talk much. Milo was looking through his photos on the camera screen. I sat by the window and looked out at the hollow. The moon was up and nearly full, and the snow reflected enough light that I could see most of the open ground from where I was sitting. No movement, nothing. We set up our tents inside the building's ground floor in the biggest room. Milo fell asleep fast, the way he always does. Within 10 minutes of getting into his sleeping bag, he was out. I could hear him breathing, slow and even. I lay there and stared at the top of my tent. Around midnight, I woke up. I don't know what woke me. No sound, no movement, just suddenly awake, the way you get when something has changed in the room and your body knows before your brain does. I lay still and listened. Then the front door creaked. Not a bang, not a slam, just a slow, low creak. The sound of old hinges moving under pressure, gradual, like something pushing against it lightly, testing it. I unzipped my tent slowly. The front door was open, maybe 8 inches. The moonlight was coming through the gap and laying a white strip across the floor. The door was still moving, just barely, still settling into the open position. I looked at Milo's tent. Still zipped. His breathing hadn't changed. I pulled on my boots and walked to the door. I looked out. The porch was empty. The steps were empty. The open ground beyond was empty. I looked down at the snow at the base of the steps. The footprints I'd seen from the drone were still there, ending right there, right at the bottom step. I stood in that doorway for maybe a minute and looked out at the hollow and the tree line beyond it, and I did not see anything move. The trees were completely still. The snow was undisturbed. The moonlight was flat and even across everything. I shut the door. I couldn't lock it. There was no lock, or if there had been one, it was long gone. I went back to my tent and lay down. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, the footprints were gone. Not melted. The temperature had dropped overnight. Not risen. Not covered. There was no new snow. The ground where the prints had been was smooth, flat, undisturbed, like they had never been there. I stood on the front steps and looked at that smooth snow for a long time. Milo came out behind me with his coffee and looked at what I was staring at and didn't say anything. We went back to exploring. There wasn't much left we hadn't seen, but Milo wanted to check the collapsed buildings at the edge of the hollow. One of them had a root cellar that was still partially accessible, a hole in the ground with a broken wooden hatch cover, stone walls going down about 8 feet. Milo wanted a photo from inside looking up. I climbed down. It smelled like dirt and cold metal and something else underneath that I couldn't identify. Old and organic. The walls were stone and the shelves built into them still had jars on them. Whatever was in the jars had dried out long ago into brittle, stringy things pressed against the glass. I was moving toward the far wall to make room for the angle Milo wanted when I heard it. A voice. Low, close, right near my ear. It said, "Don't go too far back." I spun around. The root cellar was empty. Stone walls, dirt floor, the jars on the shelves, nothing else. I looked up at the opening. Milo was up there, kneeling at the edge, adjusting the focus on his lens. His head was down. His attention was completely on the camera. I said his name. He looked down. Said what? I asked him what he just said. He looks confused. He said he hadn't said anything. I climbed out of that cellar and I didn't go back down. That night was worse. We were both in our tents. Milo was asleep again within minutes. I was lying on my back with my eyes open. At some point, I don't know the exact time, I heard something outside the building. A sound I recognized but couldn't place for a second. Then I placed it. Footsteps in snow, outside, at the side of the building, slow, one at a time, moving toward the front. I stopped breathing. The footsteps reached the front of the building and stopped. Then I heard the front door. That same creak. Slow. Opening. Then footsteps on wood. Inside the building. In the hallway just outside the room where we were sleeping. One step. Then another. Then another. Slow. Not trying to be quiet. Just walking. Deliberate. Like someone who had every reason to be there. I lay completely still. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My hands were flat on my sleeping bag and I didn't move them. The footsteps stopped. Right outside the door of our room. I stared at the tent fabric. The room was dark except for the faint moonlight coming through the window. I could see the shadow of the door frame on my tent wall. Nothing moved through it. No shadow, no shape, nothing, just silence. I lay there and counted in my head. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 40 before I heard anything else. Then, from somewhere outside, back toward the tree line, one sound, a single step in snow, and then nothing. Across the room, I could see through my tent mesh that Milo's eyes were open. He was staring at the ceiling of his tent. He hadn't moved, he was awake, and he hadn't made a sound. Neither of us spoke. We lay there until the windows started going grey with the first light. Then, without saying anything, we both started packing. No discussion, no breakfast. We just moved, rolled the sleeping bags, collapsed the tents, loaded the packs. The whole thing took maybe 15 minutes. We walked back to the truck without talking. I strapped into my snowshoes and started up the slope and didn't look back at the hollow. Milo was behind me. We walked for 40 minutes and reached the truck and loaded the gear, and Milo started the engine and let it warm up. We sat there for a minute. Then I asked him if he saw the footprints, the ones from the drone footage, ending at our door. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the windshield. Then he said yes, he saw them. I asked why he didn't say anything. He said because he also saw something else, and he didn't want to say that out loud either. I asked him what. He said just before I brought the drone down, just before the battery died, he was watching the live feed over my shoulder. He saw something at the tree line. He said it was standing just inside the trees, still facing the hollow, facing us. He said it was shaped like a person, but he wasn't sure it was one. I looked at him. He said he thought about saying something, and then decided not to, because he didn't know what good it would do. We drove out without speaking. That night at home, I charged the drone and pulled up the footage on my laptop. I went to the last few seconds before the battery cut out. The footage was choppy toward the end, the battery dropping fast, the signal cutting in and out. In the last frame before it froze, I paused it and looked at the tree line. There was something there, just inside the edge of the trees, standing in the shadow where the snow didn't reach. I looked at it for a long time. It had the rough shape of a person, head, shoulders, the suggestion of a body, but the proportions weren't right. The way it stood wasn't right, and it was completely still in a way that didn't look like patience. It looked like it had always been there, like it was part of the tree line and we just hadn't noticed it until it wanted us to. I closed the laptop. I haven't opened that folder since. Milo hasn't asked me to. We haven't talked about going back. We haven't talked about the project. Neither of us has mentioned Creswell Hollow by name since the drive home. Some places you walk into, and something there takes a measurement of you, decides whether to let you leave. I think about those footsteps stopping at the door, just stopping there, in the dark, on the other side of a wall. I don't know what it was deciding. I'm just glad it decided the way it did.